with some curiosity and a little bit of apprehension as someone has begun to build a home just down the road here across from the elementary school. It makes sense that they had to bring in so much fill to bring up the elevation a little bit and hopefully to dry it out. Some of us know how wet that parcel of ground is. And they immediately dug the foundation, have filled it in with concrete, and now, as you saw this morning, they've already begun on the framing. I am not a builder. I am not a structural engineer. But I have a little experience with these things after living through what happened in the parish hall a couple of years ago as we had to fix most of our foundation there. I've had 2 contractors at the rectory in recent weeks because we have some foundation issues there that we have to deal with. And so I just wonder how long that house will be firm upon its foundation, being where it is and so close to the marsh. I just worry. It's probably going to be fine, but it does make me think a little bit. As we go through the Passion narrative today, as we relive these final moments of Jesus' life, many things from the Gospels echo for us, remembering things he had taught or things he had said and how it ties into this moment and this near culmination of his work of salvation. And 2 of the things that echo for me among all of that are 2 of the parables that Jesus taught using the metaphor of building. Both of them metaphors to address those who would be his followers. So earlier in Luke's gospel, at the end of the 6th chapter, when addressing those folks, Jesus says, "You call me Lord, Lord, but you do not do what I command." And he teaches them a very brief parable and says, if you want to know what it looks like to follow my command, it's like the man who goes to build a house and he digs a deep foundation and he goes down to the rock and builds the foundation upon the rock so that when the waters rise, the house will stand against it. And those who do not do what I command them when they hear what I say, they're like the man who builds the house without building the foundation, who just put it on the ground, and when the waters come, the house is washed away. The second time he uses the building metaphor comes way forward in chapter 14. Again, thinking of those who say they want to follow him, he asks them, "Who among you would build a tower and not count the cost before you begin, lest you start the construction and realize you do not have enough to complete it?" He says, if you start and you don't finish, people will mock you and laugh at you because all you end up with is a foundation with nothing built on it. As we hear the stories coming of these moments and days that lead to Jesus' death, I think we see the disciples as good examples of the people in the first parable who struggle to understand foundations. We would think that the disciples of all people could have had firm foundations on the rock of Jesus because they were there firsthand to see what he could do, to hear what he taught, to know the power that he had. And yet, when the waters rose during that first Holy Week around all of them, they each crumbled in their own way, right? Judas was the first to go down. After the triumphal entry, I agree with what Father Bill preached about last week, that it was never just about the money, that Judas was one of the many who were frustrated that Jesus was not the Messiah they thought he was going to be. And so in the same anger that whips up the crowd in what we heard today, Judas betrays Jesus to his enemies. Most of the disciples, after we get through the garden, also abandon Jesus and run away in fear. We hear later that they're in hiding after his death. They're afraid they will be next because they were part of this group that followed Jesus. And the one who was brave enough to get within eyesight of Jesus, to keep tabs on his Lord, was Peter. And even Peter, when it came down to it, denied his friendship with his Lord, just as Jesus had predicted. And I think we can see what it means when those foundations are not strong enough to withhold the waters that assault. Now, interestingly, it's Jesus who seems to be a part of his own parable of the building of the tower for those who are witnessing what is going on during this Passion narrative. Because for many, what they see is a wannabe Messiah who has not been successful, who has not done all the things Messiahs are going to do. And as he is brought to trial and crucified and dies, all they see is failure. They see a foundation for something that will never be completed as far as they can tell. And it tells us that he is mocked. And they revile him because he is not what he said he was in their eyes. Now, each of us, as we go through this story every year on Passion Sunday, and again in Holy Week as we go back through the moments that we've gone through today, we have to determine where we are in responding to these events and the identity of Jesus for ourselves. And there are examples of ways that people do this in response to who Jesus is in the story that we heard. The disciples are one group. They were really gung-ho until they weren't. And they fade into the background and they hide from what is coming. The women are a whole nother group that we hear about. In Luke's gospel, the women are always just there behind the scenes, supporting Jesus in his ministry. And even today, throughout all that has happened, they are there at a distance, loving and caring for Jesus. They don't even want to take their eyes off of him until he's laid in the tomb. And the women's care and affection for Jesus will come back the next time they see him, when they go to prepare his body after the Sabbath. We have the religious leaders, who are the people who are so worried about how Jesus and his gospel will rob them of their authority that they come up with this scheme and the set of lies to have him accused before the authorities and have him executed. And then there's those leaders of Rome, those politicians who are so keen to preserve their own power that they buy into the lies that are being told, even though the gospel goes to great pains to tell us they don't believe them to be true. Sometimes politicians, out of expediency, will accept the lie if it helps them retain their power and control, which is what's happening in first century Rome. And then, of course, we have an interesting bit of hope that comes from that same system of oppression in Rome when we hear about this one centurion, somebody who is the tip of the spear for Roman oppression, who we might imagine was assigned to the crucifixion detail. Maybe he was there from the very first part of the morning where they took Jesus from his cell, took him to the council, took him before Pilate, across town to Herod, back to Pilate, was told to get him ready for crucifixion, march him to Golgotha, nail him to the cross, and stay there to make sure the sentence of death was carried out. This centurion has witnessed a lot and has seen how Jesus behaved throughout all of it. And the end thing for that centurion that he arrives at is, this man was innocent. As other translations say, this man was righteous. As other gospels say, this man was God's son. There is at least a glimmer of hope that those who see what's going on can see in it some sense of who and what Jesus was, and not just see what was on the surface. And it was a remarkable thing for the centurion to take notice of, especially in Luke's telling. Because Luke's gospel, in this passion telling, Jesus is a lot more resolute than some of the other versions of these moments. Jesus does not have any cries of anguish from the cross. The closest we get to a sense that Jesus is unsure about his path is the night in the garden, when he asks God, if it's your will, I'll do this, but if you want me to go another way, I'll take the exit ramp. But when the crowd arrives with the torches and the swords, and Jesus realizes what the path is going to be, he is resolute from that point on. He is in control. He is sure of who he is and who his God and Father is. So he is softly powerful in front of his trials. He is caring and loving, seeking forgiveness for those who are killing him, kind to the criminal who asks for mercy and finds it granted. And it's in Luke's gospel that Jesus' final exclamation is one that is not a whimper of a dying man, but a loud expression of trust, commending his spirit to God. And for each of us, as we now rewind and on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday play through what we've just read and heard in the gospel, it's an opportunity for us to figure out how is it that we will receive and respond to this moment, to this Jesus who lays down his life. And it's not to play a game with how do we fit into the story that's told from 2,000 years ago. it's an invitation to how it is that we respond to the moments of the passion here and now as they play out again and again and again in our world. Because I want you to know Jesus is still being betrayed on a regular basis. Every time there is a Christian leader or a preacher or a church who takes the gospel of Jesus and twists it around for their own purpose so they can bludgeon somebody with it, or so they can gain some sense of power and authority, or worse, gain some kind of money from it, every time they wield it as a weapon and hurt people with the gospel by misunderstanding it, they are no different than Judas betraying Jesus because he misunderstood what the Messiah was and wasn't going to be. Jesus is still denied every single day. Every time there is a vulnerable person who is used as a pawn or exploited, it is a denial for those who understand who Jesus is and what Jesus expects of his followers who do nothing in response. Every time a hungry person goes without food, every time somebody who's sick is denied opportunities to find health and wholeness and what it takes to find that, that is a denial of who Jesus is and what Jesus demands of his followers. Every time somebody embraces lies instead of wielding the truth of God and God's love, every time somebody casts out an alien and vilifies them instead of welcoming them in and caring for them, that is a denial of who Jesus is and who we know we as Jesus followers are invited to be. And when we do nothing, when we stay silent, it is as though Peter says, I'm not one of those folks. You must have me mistaken for somebody else. Because people know what Jesus' followers look like. And Jesus is still abandoned on a regular basis today as well. People who walk away from God altogether or have no place for Jesus because they don't understand, they haven't ever encountered the life-giving good news of God in Christ in a way that maybe wasn't wielded as a weapon or as an exclusionary tool. Maybe they don't understand how a life and a world can be transformed by the grace of the love of Jesus Christ and the God who shared him so freely with all of us. And when we know that there are people out there who could use that, who are hurting, who need healing, who need that grace in their life to find wholeness, and we don't say anything about what we know to be true for ourselves, when we hold the gospel in our fist, in our pockets so we don't lose it, instead of sharing it with people who need it, it is that abandonment, again and again on display in this world. Now there is in this gospel narrative, before we reach the end, one character who is presented who gives us another way of responding to who Jesus is and what Jesus does. Somebody who's willing to stand up and stick their neck out a little bit, even if in the case of the gospel today it was a little bit late. Because we learn about Joseph of Arimathea, a Jewish member of the Sanhedrin who was there when the council came up with and voted on the plan to have Jesus put to death, who did not support it. We don't know a lot about him. We don't know exactly who he thought Jesus was or what he thought, but we know that he was waiting expectantly for the coming of God's kingdom and probably saw something of interest in this Jesus of Nazareth. And so he didn't go with the crowd. He was able to not support what they did. And he doesn't go away and forget about Jesus either. Jesus apparently has stuck with him what he saw and what he heard. So that when Jesus' broken body is taken down from the cross, Joseph asks for the body for himself. It's got to be a risky behavior. Everybody else scatters as far as they can from Jesus, who doesn't want to be attached to him in any way lest they be accused. And Joseph allows a target to be put on his back to ensure that Jesus is laid to rest, not just in any old fashion, but by giving him an incredibly powerful, faithful, caring burial with the linen cloth in the unused tomb. You didn't get to be laid to rest in an unused tomb if you weren't somebody really important or somebody with a lot of money to buy it. Tombs were expensive real estate, and you just literally stacked people up in them, and still do in parts of the world today. But Joseph risked losing his stature, maybe his livelihood and his reputation, to show some kind of care and to say this man was special, regardless of what has happened. Joseph probably doesn't know what's going to happen in the days to come. Nobody in the story that we heard retold today knows what is about to come, even though they will remember later, oh yeah, Jesus did talk about that. But in this moment, they don't know. And the thing is, we can understand for them why they behave the way they do, because they see in Christ's death some kind of failure and where their disappointment would come from. They don't have our benefit to know where we go and what we celebrate next Sunday. But then the question is, if we know where we're going with the story, if we know what God is up to and what we're going to celebrate on Easter, why do we have so much trouble? Why are we still repeating and allowing the same behaviors and mistreatment of Jesus when we know the whole truth and the whole story? There's a question there for us to wrestle with in this Lenten season as we go back through these stories again. As I said, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a builder or an architect, but as the waters of this world continue to beat against me and against the church and about the whole world that we live in, I'm aware of my foundation, which is a little too shaky at times, in the sense that other foundations are a little too shaky as well. And there is an opportunity in going back more slowly and deeply through these stories of Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday and the first part of the Easter Vigil to connect it with all the things we know about Jesus that he said and did from the Gospels, that we uncover some solid rock upon which we can build a foundation based on the grace and love of God and the story that is ultimately one of salvation. Jesus did not fail to count the cost of what he was doing in his role as a Messiah. His death, as we know, was not a failure. Jesus absolutely counted the cost. And he knew he had no choice but to pay it. To know that his self-sacrifice is what could set the world free and to complete God's creation. And so he knew the cost of laying down his life, as we've heard he was on a mission to do and has now completed. And for us in this Holy Week, it's another opportunity for us to count the cost of our discipleship. What does it mean to believe that Jesus' death was not in vain and that the resurrection to come holds great meaning and value for us? Because this is a week not to just tell a story. It's a week where yet again we get to tell our story.